Cuba has always hosted visitors from around the world, so to what degree is Chinese tourism important in Cuba? Well, I put that question to Mark Murphy, a travel expert and founder of travelpulse.com.
I think tourism as a whole is massively important. It's the biggest contributor to the Cuban economy. Chinese tourism is important because of the long-standing relationship between China and Cuba, and it's growing, but it's really tiny relative to, let's say, the Canadian travel market or the European travel market, which are the two biggest markets that contribute to the over 4 million visitors that Cuba just recently saw last year.
So with U.S. President Donald Trump considering a reverse on Cuba diplomacy, is Cuba now trying to entice visitors from other places to continue this tourism surge?
Well, I think to clarify, when Trump came out, it was very dramatic. We're going to cancel these old policies, this and that. And like many things we've heard, the actual truth is a lot less than what people on the surface believe. Americans are going, they just have to go with an accredited tour operator, a cruise line, et cetera. And that's how most were going anyway. So it's not really that big a deal. The problem for the American traveler is the confusion it's created in the marketplace. So for Americans, it is open for business and they can go. As far as looking at other markets, I think the interesting thing about Cuba is Cuba has been open pretty much to the rest of the world for decades for tourism. Americans are really infatuated with it because we've been unable theoretically to travel there legally. And so for Americans, it's this nostalgia and it's these, 1956 Chevys and Plymouths, et cetera. And I was there a little over a year ago, and it's really a spectacular landscape for, a frozen time. But I think overall, nothing's really going to change about how Cuba goes out and gets business. The strategy is going to be to embrace markets like China and have that grow because it's over 100,000 visitors and has tremendous upside with the Chinese population. But keep in mind, for everybody else, they've been competing with the likes of St. Lucia or Jamaica or the Cayman Islands and so on and so forth, Puerto Rico. So they are up against some really well-established players, and they've got to really up the infrastructure game to satisfy a surge of new tourists coming in that are beyond the curious people that have yet to see this particular destination.
You mentioned infrastructure and that you've been there about a year ago. What would you say is the biggest change in regards to tourism in Cuba? What have you seen in the past year, and what's still in the works?
So what you're seeing is the partnerships that have begun to form with the hotel community in terms of, big hotel brands of, let's say, the Marriott brand or Starwood, et cetera, that wants to build and have flagged hotels in the destination. You've certainly seen the other investment going on for years. The biggest challenge for the destination is going to be how do they meet the demands of a more affluent travel market that expects certain things when you're paying $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 to visit the place versus going to another place where you might only be paying $2,000 and the accommodations are nicer, the amenities are nicer, the service is better, the food's better. That's what Cuba is going to be up against when the playing field gets leveled and the nostalgia aspect gets backseated. You're going to find that outside of the main area, historic area of Havana and the squares there, that they're going to have to invest in reconstruction because a lot of the places are great for a photographer to capture images, but not so great if you're there visiting and you want accommodations that you've grown accustomed to when you're spending thousands of dollars on a trip.